Imagine trying to get somewhere in New York City without your Maps app, or going to the DMV and actually just sitting and waiting. We can all admit that life would be harder and more uncomfortable without a smartphone. So I decided to give it a try. Here's what I found. At the end of last year, I was pretty unhappy with how much time and attention I was giving screens. And just about everyone I talked to felt the same way about their screen usage as well. My brother Josh and I had just finished reading this compelling book, The Way Home by Mark Boyle, where the author gave up all technology for an entire year. We're talking even no lighters. If he could do that, then we could get rid of our smartphones, right? So we went out and bought light phones, which are designed for people who are transitioning away from smartphones. And in December, I started the experiment. No screen entertainment of any kind, no podcasts, not even music if I was alone. The concept of a dopamine detox swept through the internet a few years back. There were anecdotes of people taking back their lives with complete transformations of attention span, productivity, reward systems, a sense of clarity and purpose, and the list goes on. One of the main things I learned from doing my own dopamine detox is exactly this. We all suck at delayed gratification, meaning we have a hard time trading current discomfort for a future reward. Now, don't take offense to this. I know I would have if you would have told me the same thing before I started this experiment. But hear me out. I work out, I eat healthy, meditate, cold showers, all the classic self-help stuff. But what I didn't realize was there was all these moments between the moments that I wasn't practicing delayed gratification. Compulsively checking email or social media, texting with friends, YouTube on breaks, TV to decompress in the evenings, podcasts on drives. And when you add all this up, it's an alarmingly large portion of the day. So for me, my own hubris from all of the good habits I had created allowed bad habits in on a Trojan horse. Looking back on that first week, it kind of makes me laugh. The first 2 days, I felt like a superhero, like I had somehow broken through the matrix and now could pity all these poor addicts walking around with their heads buried in their phones. Then day 3 hit hard. I felt sluggish, foggy, I even had a headache. Classic signs of withdrawal. My body was finally coming to terms with the fact that this wasn't just a vacation from the phone, this was the real deal. And worst of all, the trigger for all my cravings were everywhere, in everyone's pockets at all times. After the first 10 days or so, I felt like my body got used to having no smartphone. But there were still some highs and lows in the next 3 months. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think that everyone should get rid of their smartphones, but we should all consider the role that they play in our lives, both positive and negative. So here are some pros and cons from my experience of ditching the smartphone. Con: life feels dull. I'm not gonna lie, I love consuming content. It's exhilarating. You never know what thought you haven't thought before is coming down the pipe on that next podcast, or what crazy thing no one thought was humanly possible was finally done. Without constant stimuli provoking pleasurable thoughts and feelings, there are moments where you quite viscerally feel that saying, wherever you go, there you are. Pro: I think it's easy to distract yourself to the point where you don't engage with yourself or life. I learned a lot about my inner workings, how I think, how I feel, how I interact with friends or loved ones, how my compulsions or addictions dictate my actions. As my mind began to acclimate to the slower pace and intensity of stimuli, I started to fall back in love with things that I used to find exhilarating. I read 9 books in the first 30 days. I was walking more, stretching, learning random things like tying knots and drawing. I felt awakened, like I had a new sense of wonder in the world. Con: there's no easy distractions or deflections. I brought up the DMV earlier in this video because early on in this experiment, I actually had to sit at the DMV for over an hour with no smartphone, and I forgot a book. When is the last time you sat in a public place and just sat? It was nearly unbearable. There are times when you just don't want to deal with an uncomfortable situation or an uncomfortable thought, but now I kind of just had to. And this was one of the main things I realized after some time without a smartphone is how much I use it just to deflect or bypass something that's stressful or uncomfortable. Pro: we should all be able to deal with the discomforts and stress of normal life, especially boredom. Bypassing stress only leads to more stress in the future, along with a decreased capacity to handle stress in general. I don't know about you, but if I just had some coffee and I'm feeling good, boredom is actually pretty easy. But if I'm feeling tired, stressed, hungry, etc., I find that I can barely handle it at all. So exercising your tolerance for stress or discomforts in all facets of your life, not just the ones that you're good at, seems like the epitome of growth. And again, it's easy to think that your cold shower is doing this for you. Don't be fooled. Con: texting is slow. Whether you're using the light phone or any other non-smartphone, it's gonna be way slower than what you're used to. Pro: I found myself being very intentional with my texting. Some things don't warrant more than a single word response, and that's okay. Or if a response does seem nuanced, maybe it's best to actually have a quick phone call. And just like putting into place any sort of change in your life, it's going to be uncomfortable for the people around you. But if you explain to them and stick to your guns, ultimately they'll respect you more in the long term. Con: navigation is challenging. I can't speak for other non-smartphones, but the light phone does have a navigation, but it's a bit dodgy. If I was going somewhere that I knew I needed to navigate to, then I would look up the directions beforehand, and if they were pretty complicated, I would actually just print out the directions like old times. At one point, I even had to walk into a gas station to ask for directions. Pro: navigation is something that was essential evolutionarily, and some research shows that our loss of this ability actually affects us in more ways than just being lost without a cell phone. There's actually a type of thinking involved with navigation called spatial memory that dulls without constant use. So for me, I became far more engaged with driving and navigation in general. I started remembering street names out of necessity and building maps in my mind. And in general, I felt like my memory was sharper altogether. Con: no internet can be tricky. You can't just look up anything on the spot anytime. Like, for example, getting a business's phone number. I actually had a somewhat scary situation where my dog was having an anaphylactic response from a bee sting and I needed my vet's number and I couldn't just look it up. Also, you can't just check your email whenever or use social media for messaging. And also things like QR codes and mobile tickets are becoming the norm. Pro: it would seem that we aren't meant to have all information accessible to us at all times. I found myself becoming more curious about things for the exact reason that I couldn't just look it up right now. The world became more interesting because my mind could wander. In regards to email and work in general, I actually found that I became more productive because it forced me to batch work. No longer could I always be working. So when I sat down on the computer, it meant go time. And as for QR codes and things, honestly, unfortunately, you'll just have to talk to people. It actually made for some really cool and funny interactions with people where I would explain to them why I have this little tic-tac of a phone, and many of them were actually envious of the idea, which only reaffirmed the idea that we all know our phones are bad for us in some way. So I feel like this begs the question, is the light phone just a crutch for me? Just bypassing my inability to use technology in healthy and meaningful ways? Tech and social media companies are spending billions of dollars on trying to figure out how they can keep your eyes and attention on them. They're, in a sense, hacking our brains. Should we feel bad when they're successful? I'm still torn. I'd like to think we can create healthy relationships with technology, especially as it becomes more and more integrated into every moment of our lives. I'd love to be able to use my smartphone as a tool to enhance my life, not take life from me. So I pose the question to you. If you feel like you have a healthy relationship with your phone or technology in general, please share your wisdom in the comment section below. And if you don't, read those comments. I truly feel like this is one of the most important topics in health right now, and it's something that affects every single one of us. Once you're done reading some of that wisdom, comment what you struggle with personally, and if you think you could get rid of your smartphone as well. All right, that is it for the video. If you want to support Strength Side, like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.